Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. My name is Ashley Rumschlag, and I'm joined today by Rachel Myers, our senior digital services specialist, who will be monitoring the Q&A and chat for today's presentation. Today, we are scheduled for a 30-minute webinar. We will answer as many questions as we can at the very end of the presentation. So make sure that you're adding your questions to the Q&A as you're listening along. And just a few things to cover before we dive in. We do have live closed captionings available for the webinar. If you aren't currently seeing them or you want to toggle them on and off, please click More in the menu bar and then select Show Subtitles. This is a Zoom webinar, and so we have, so all of our attendees today are in listen-only mode. Again, please ask those questions in the Q&A box and use the chat to communicate with other attendees, as well as the panelists and hosts for today's webinar. And we will email a certificate of attendance, as well as the transcript, a recording of today's webinar, as well as any additional resources that may be referenced throughout the presentation. And just a reminder, we did launch the brand new domesticshelters.org website. And if you have any feedback, thoughts or suggestions, feel free to reach out to us at info@domesticshelters.org. I'll share that email address once again a little bit later. And one other thing that I want to remind everyone about, it is the giving season is quick approaching. So obviously Giving Tuesday is coming up, end of year giving. We all know that people get very, very generous around this time of year. And one of the ways that people give through domesticshelters.org is our wish list program. And I'll share a short video here momentarily about what that looks like for donors. But basically, any US-based shelter can set up a wish list on domesticshelters.org. Those are highly visible. People who search on Google find those very easily, and that's usually how people find people to give to. So if you are a US-based shelter, please make sure that your wish list is updated and turned on if it isn't yet. Rachel Myers, who is on the call today, is the best person to reach out to if you have any questions about that. So Rachel, if you don't mind, maybe drop your email address in the chat so anyone can get in touch with you if they have questions about the wish list or they simply just want to get it turned on. So let me just real quick share with you what that looks like in a short video. This video shows exactly what the donor experience is when they use the wish list platform. So here we go.
Giving goods and critically needed items to domestic violence shelters just got a lot easier. In fact, it's now just as easy as buying anything online. Until now, giving items like food, clothing, and other necessities was harder than it should be. You had to find out what items a shelter needed, go to the store and purchase the item, contact your favorite shelter again to coordinate a drop-off to a secure private location, and then set aside time from your busy day to go across town and deliver your gifts. Phew, that's a lot of work. Of course, it was well worth it, but now, shelters using the domesticshelters.org wishlist platform make giving much easier. Just visit your shelter's wishlist on domesticshelters.org. Select the items from your shelter's online store. Enter your information, and if you like, a personal message to the shelter. When you check out, your items will be delivered automatically to your shelter. That's it. What once took a few hours, you can now tackle in just seconds. You save time, your shelter saves time. Your gifts are assured of being exactly the items your shelter specified it needs. It's tax deductible. And best of all, you help domestic violence programs and victims and survivors create a brighter future. Now the next step is up to you. Your local domestic violence shelter needs you. Imagine running a business where the services you provided were offered for free. That's why making ends meet is a daily struggle for shelters, and why your gift today is so critical. Can we count on you to send critically needed items today? It's easy, it's impactful, and it'll make you feel wonderful.
All right. And I know Rachel was going to drop a link to the actual wish list landing page. So if you are interested in donating as well, you can search for a local wish list, local program that has a wish list near you and support them there. So let's go ahead and move on. Again, there's that email address. So info@domesticshelters.org. Again, if you have any questions, comments, just want to say hi, we love to hear from everyone. Okay, and we are so excited. I'm going to hand it off to Suchandan and Carrie from helpline software.com. They're going to be presenting today on those challenges that come up with hotlines at domestic violence programs. So welcome, Suchandan, and welcome, Carrie. So glad to have you here today.
Ashley, thank you so much for having us. Ashley and Rachel, thank you guys so much for having us here at domesticshelters.org. And for everybody in the audience, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. We are grateful to be a part of it. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. All right, can everybody see my screen?
It's showing up for me, yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, so so my name is Suchandan, and I work with agencies like a lot of your agencies in the audience here today around the unique challenges that they have around their hotlines, their text or chat lines, scheduling at their organizations, as well as burnout. I've worked pretty closely with each of the agencies whose logos you see on the screen right here. And this is my colleague, Carrie. Carrie has a ton of experience in the RCC and the DV spaces. And we've worked on a bunch of projects together. So today, we're here to share what we've learned. Looks like we're having a little bit of a tech issue. Okay, we're here to share what we've learned. So large corporations use technology to make sure that the people that are reaching out to their organizations via phone, chat, or text get the service they need quickly and in a way that's sustainable for their organizations. The problem is that technology hasn't really been available for local crisis agencies. And it leads to the following. So typically the way it manifests is with the crisis coordinator in some kind of problematic situation. They have to figure out why somebody who is not on the schedule is receiving hotline calls, or somebody just burned out and they have to completely rework the schedule for today. Something is going on and they have to get on top of it now. Typically that involves contacting their vendor. So that might be an answering service, it might be some other vendor, and engaging in this firefighting. Finally, the problem gets solved, but since it didn't get solved in a permanent way, the cycle repeats itself over and over and over again, which eventually leads to burnout. So what we've learned is that the real root cause of this burnout is that organizations just don't know that there are good solutions to these problems. So our message to you is really just that you have options. So not all hotlines experience high hotline and scheduling related burnout, large numbers of missed calls, or large hold times. And if your organization experiences these issues, then you have options. So we've seen leaders at agencies have tremendous impact at their organizations and for their communities by solving some of these common challenges around their hotlines, but solving them in a permanent way. So typically, organizations will see more clients getting through, better experience for clients, and a huge time-saving impact. For more clients getting through, you see we've shared one statistic about one organization, and that's really because it's the systems that organizations tend to have in place tend to not be conducive to giving very good estimates like this. So this is one estimate from a situation where we were able to get pretty good estimates about the actual increase in hotline usage, and it increased by about 84% overnight from switching away from their answering service. Better experience for clients can mean a lot of things. Often it means dramatic reduction in hold time and a dramatic reduction in the number of missed calls. Organizations typically save around a half a full-time employee when they solve these problems in a permanent way. So we're not here to tell you how to run your organization. We're here to just share what other people have shared with us. So nearly everything that we're presenting today is presented via quotes from people who are in a position similar to yours at another organization. Some of these will apply to your organization, some won't. And every time we present a challenge, we'll also give you a checklist so that you can know that if the solution that you're planning will solve that problem in a permanent and sustainable way. Okay, we'll start off with a poll about the challenges that your organization faces.
All right, just making sure that everyone can see that poll question. I don't know if you want to, if it's okay, Suchan, I'll go ahead and read off the questions as
Please.
People follow along. Sure. So the first question is, what best describes your organization? Are you a 24/7 hotline, phone hotline, 24/7 chat and text hotline, limited hour chat and text hotline, limited hours phone hotline? Don't have a hotline, but I'm interested in starting one. I don't have a hotline, but there's one in my area. You'll notice that those are all available to be checked. You can select as many different answers that apply to you. The second question is, do you have to fix mistakes by your answering service? So if that doesn't apply to you, feel free to skip it. Oh, I'm so sorry. Those are all required. So that is actually my mistake. I'll fix that for the next one. But if you, go ahead and hit no if that doesn't apply to you. And the third question is, do they have sometimes, so they, meaning the answering service, sometimes send calls to the wrong volunteer or staff member? And have you heard of another organization facing the same challenges that you face? We've got about a little over half. Maybe we'll try to get to a little over 60% here. Okay, I'll give everyone about 5 more seconds here to get your answers in. Okay, go ahead and end that poll here and share the results. Shonda, I don't know if you want to share your thoughts on those results.
I won't talk about them specifically just because I know we're a little bit tight on time. I'll just go right ahead.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, just to point out, it looks like most people here have a 24/7 hotline. All right, I'll stop the sharing.
Okay. Okay, so what we're going to talk about is what happens first when having tech issues. What happens when non-trauma informed third parties answer your hotline?
So many of the organizations that we've talked with have ways to answer the hotline that involve somebody who's not one of their advocates answering the hotline first. So being the first person who a survivor speaks with when they reach out to that organization. And we've heard from some agencies that not being able to have that kind of first person be one of their own advocates can lead to some difficulties. So one organization shared with us that their well-intentioned answering service is saying some very problematic things or asking things they shouldn't of survivors. And another organization shared with us that they currently have an answering service, and a lot of the times the operators will kind of go off and do their own thing, and that they're very inappropriate with the callers. I've worked with an answering service where an operator was confused why a caller had called and reached out to their backup saying, well, I don't know why this person reached out, and then don't get raped. And while we as advocates and educators and all of these organizations and all of these things are trying really hard to combat these myths about sexual violence and domestic violence in our communities, they are out there, and they might be something that if a third-party answering service is one that works with you,
those myths might be something that a caller is interacting with right initially when they reach out. They also might not be representing the services that your agency offers to callers. So I've learned about a caller who was turned away because the answering service operator said, "Oh, you're calling around sexual harassment. That's not a service offered by the agency," and it actually was. And then so it can be a kind of challenge to kind of constantly need to address issues with when the first person interacting with a caller is a third party. And then another concern might be confidentiality, and making sure that the confidentiality and quality assurance that the third party answering service might be doing to make sure that their operators are following the right script also is compatible with the confidentiality needs that agencies have. So for example, I shared two anecdotes that I learned about because calls were being recorded as soon as a caller was connected with an operator. And at the agency that I was with, that was something that we really didn't want to have happen because because of that client confidentiality.
Okay. Our key takeaways from this is really just to evaluate the impact of your third party. So consider if the net impact of your third party is positive or negative for your community, and take time to get feedback from your community or the other places where you have data before making a decision. Finally, what we'll say about this is don't repair, beware. So if you're experiencing these issues, then consider switching to a different vendor. We've seen agencies spend tremendous amounts of effort to correct these vendor mistakes with limited success. Agencies that we work with express frustration over what their answering service says to clients, the harm this causes, and the fact that there's little they can do about it. The training that they provide their operators at the answering service tends to not have lasting impact. From what we've seen, the only people that are qualified to speak to your callers are your trauma-informed advocates. And if that's what you want, then that is an option. Next, we'll talk about client hold times.
So another kind of concern that we've heard from a number of agencies is the amount of time that callers are spending on hold before they're actually connecting with an advocate. One agency pointed out that callers hang up more frequently when they're on hold for a long time. And I think that's something that's pretty understandable of many of us. When you're on hold for a very long time, you might ultimately give up. But the problem is that that means that there's a survivor who's not getting the service that they reached out for when that happens. So another agency shared with us that their answering service doesn't always answer automatically, and that was a real problem for the agency because they had to answer the hotline immediately for one of their grants, and in order to be compliant with that grant. I've definitely had a situation where working with a third party vendor, they were servicing multiple organizations that had kind of different call structures, but because it was one vendor, they were kind of triaging calls such that we ended up having multiple times where survivors were reaching out and not getting service for around 2 hours. And ultimately that's just results in a more negative experience of reaching out for clients. And sometimes it results in not actually being able to have a client connect with your advocates.
Okay, our takeaway from this is really just that hold times may be more than you expect. So if your vendor includes a human call writing component, then try calling your hotline at various hours to see what the hold times actually are. And also about this, we'll say don't repair, beware. If you're experiencing these issues, then consider switching to a different vendor. We've seen agencies spend tremendous amounts of effort to correct these vendors' mistakes with limited success. Okay, so a lot of the agencies that we talk to have some kind of call order that's followed when a hotline call comes in, for example. So when a hotline call comes in, it'll first go to the hotline primary, then the hotline backup, and then there's typically other people that are on call. The problem is that this call order isn't always followed. So now we're going to be talking about the challenges and really what the problems that occur as a result of that.
And we know that many of you kind of spend so much time and effort to make a schedule that really will work and be as even across staff and hotline advocates as possible. You really need to be on the hotline when you're on the hotline and off the hotline when you're off the hotline. And that kind of call order disruption can have an impact on that. And as you see in the quote, one agency shared that a volunteer, a staff person may have done everything in their power to change the time they were able to pick up. And, when they still got a call when they tried so hard not to, then it inevitably can create a lot of tension. This organization did share that they basically lost one of their colleagues because the answering service was calling her for everything. And she was like, that's not fair, it's overwhelming. And that person was, trying to fix the problem, but didn't know what the solution could be besides telling the third-party answering service not to call her, but then they did call her. So that kind of highlights that there can be, some challenges when the call order isn't followed. And another kind of example is I'm in an area where there's kind of one vendor that services a lot of different agencies. And sometimes the agencies can get kind of confused within that vendor. So they sometimes have called me with client information for a client who was reaching out to a different agency at the time. And one time I was able to find this because I was the one calling in. So they called me and said, hey, I have a call for you. It's Carrie, here's their number. And that wasn't the, and that I was like, that's me. So ultimately that might have an impact on safety, protecting client confidentiality. Might also have some burnout from staff members who might be, not necessarily like the ones who are on call, but are the ones who are getting the calls. And that can lead to some tension between hotline leadership and the staff who are taking those extra calls as well. Just because when people are not on call and still getting calls, that can be really difficult.
Yeah, so I don't know if I mentioned this already, but Carrie used to be the crisis coordinator at Orange County View Crisis Center in North Carolina. And every time we have conversations, I learn so much from them. This is a quote that an executive director shared with us, and it really highlights why we're here today. So if you look at the last 3 lines or so of this quote right here, you can see that so the executive director said, it's overwhelming. And I was like, I don't know what's the solution besides telling them don't call her, but they did call her. And you can see that, this this organization lost a key staff member because, their call order wasn't being followed. And, if you want to look more at the root cause of this, it really happened because they didn't know that they had other options. So that's kind of why we're here today. We're just here to tell you, you have other options if this is happening to you. And it won't happen to everybody. Our takeaway is just, don't try to repair a broken vendor. Look at your contract with your answering service or other vendor. Most answering service contracts that we've seen are month to month. And you can switch to a different provider if the service that you currently have doesn't follow your rotation schedule. Next we're going to be talking about interrupted client calls. And again, I just want to highlight, every agency is different. For some agencies, interrupted client calls are a really big deal and something they want to avoid. Other agencies have very different policies around things like this. So we're not suggesting one approach versus another. You guys have to decide what makes the most sense for your specific agencies. We're just here to share what the options could be.
So as you can see, some agencies have some concerns with having client calls that, when multiple calls come in at once. One agency shared that sometimes they get forwarded a call when they're already on a call with the survivor. And that for that individual, it can be very disorienting and stressful. They feel rushed and bad that they're not able to answer the next call and distracted from speaking to the survivor they're already on the phone with. Um, so that can be kind of one of those situations of trying to talk with two survivors at once and not really being able to give any of them kind of your full attention. So that's, I've definitely also been on calls where a survivor heard the kind of beeping sound of there being a new call coming in and decided to end the call short, kind of abruptly, or that their crisis didn't necessarily count, or that the agency didn't feel like their crisis counted, and so that can lead to a bad experience for callers and staff, and just some extra stress for staff, as well as it can make it more difficult to kind of track down what happened when a call was missed due to an advocate being on the call, already on the phone with another survivor. So that can kind of be another kind of challenge that we can talk more about as well. And as well as this kind of gets into those hold times. If you have to wait for a call to kind of route to the backup, that might be more time that the survivor is on the phone or on hold, while kind of waiting to get connected with someone, depending on what the agency chooses to do around their policies around that.
Our takeaway about this is really just that you shouldn't have unwanted interruptions. So if you want your advocates, when they're already on a call supporting somebody who's called your hotline, if you want those advocates to be automatically skipped and the next person to be called, then that should be possible with your vendor. And then if that's not your policy, so some agencies that we talk to say that, if somebody's on the hotline speaking to a caller, then that person should be able to take up to one additional call for triage purposes. And if that's your agency's policy, then that should be possible as well. We're just here to show you what the options are. And certainly your vendor should not barge into live calls. That's a big no. Okay. Next, we're going to be talking about this question that crisis coordinators often have to ask: why did you miss that call? A lot of there's a couple of key scenarios that account for the bulk of the reasons why crisis coordinators have to actually ask this question in the first place. And the interesting thing about those situations is that there are things you can do to prevent them from coming up in the first place. So saving you a lot of time. And Carrie will talk about that next.
So our first scenario is one where the advocate isn't actually getting the calls, but the crisis coordinator is coming, to the advocate to have that awkward conversation that it sounds like many of us on this webinar have had before, of saying, hey, so how come you didn't answer the call yesterday? The answering service said that they called you at 3:47 a.m. And the advocate goes, oh, actually my phone never rang. And it's weird, sometimes it rings for only like a second and then it disconnects. And so what we've learned is that a lot of agencies are spending a lot of time kind of having, trying to learn about these tech issues, which ultimately are just from kind of low reception on the advocate's end, without a lot of support and with kind of limited information about what the problem actually is. And kind of crisis coordinators tend to have a ton of other things to do without necessarily trying to resolve tech issues, which is also, important and can have an impact. As well as it can be really difficult on advocates when they're, they're by the phone, ready to answer, and then just not able to get a call. And, repeatedly having these conversations of, hey, a call came in, what happened? Why didn't you answer? And the advocate kind of going, I did, I wanted to. And then I've also, and then it can also be more difficult because when that person is not answering the call, the other kind of backup person might be answering more of the calls when the calls aren't going to the primary. And I've worked at an agency, and I know that a number of different agencies kind of use a system where it's based on the number of rings. So the primary is expected to answer within 3 rings of the phone ringing. For example, the backup's expected to answer after 4 rings, and anybody's expected to answer it after 6 rings. But what we've learned is that a number of different agencies might be having issues with staff members' phones not ringing at the same time. And so what I've learned is that sometimes some staff were just not answering the hotline for months because of those tech issues. And so it was always rolling over to the backup and kind of always rolling over to the other staff to answer those calls just because of a reception issue on those staff members' parts, which is, nobody's fault, but kind of had these negative impacts.
Okay, the takeaway here is really just that you shouldn't have to reach out to your advocates to figure out why they missed a call. Your vendor should just tell you this, ideally in real time. So when you're evaluating your system, just make sure that your advocates have enough time. And that means a couple of different things. So one is, do your advocates have enough time to answer? So this refers to the amount of time that their phone is actually physically ringing. The next is, do your advocates have enough time to get to a quiet place after they answer the call, but before they're connected to the caller? Next is, does your vendor have some kind of strategy to avoid this low reception issue that we just went over? Do they have some kind of strategy to help get cell phones out of low power mode? And then finally, a number of agencies have shared with us that the number of rings option their vendor provides doesn't work as expected. So consider not relying on number of rings. Finally, you can choose a vendor that tells you in real time if advocates that are called are out of reception. So that could be significantly useful depending on the number of advocates that you have and how many calls they take in lower reception areas. We'll talk about one more scenario here.
So it could be that the advocate actually forgot about their shift. Kind of the scenario that we were talking about earlier started very similarly, where the crisis coordinator says, hey, how come you didn't answer the call yesterday? The answering service said that they called you at 3:47 a.m. and the advocate just plain old forgot that they were on call, and that's why they missed the call. And that can be really, really frustrating from the coordinator perspective as well. Kind of a lot of agencies that I've talked with rely on volunteers to answer the hotline, which I think is an absolutely fantastic system for a whole range of reasons. But I think it may lead to having this conversation with some more frequency. For example, I was working with a lot of university students for a short while, or for a while. And then during finals time, everyone kind of ended up forgetting about their shifts or needing extra time to study for their chem test, or just forgot that they were on call. And that can have an impact of having the caller not get a service or kind of wait for a longer time to get to the backup to actually get their service, as well as kind of that challenge when the backup is answering calls that should have been going to the primary. And it, like I said, it can be frustrating to have that conversation about, hey, why didn't you get a call with an advocate? And then also we've talked with some crisis coordinators who have, tried to find some workarounds for the kind of issue of people forgetting about their shifts by kind of manually reminding every advocate every day. And that can lead to a whole lot of time that the crisis coordinator is spending to try to remind people about their shifts.
Okay, and I'll see if I can switch to the next screen. Okay, so if you're having some challenges around advocates forgetting their shifts, consider a shift reminder system. So your vendor should allow your advocates to opt into some kind of automated shift reminders that text your advocates the day before or the day of shifts, reminding them. And when you're evaluating systems, consider your ability to customize these shift reminders. So you can use this to remind your advocates about key policies that your organization has so that they're top of mind, as well as key policy changes that your organization has. Shift reminders can help reduce missed shifts. Okay, next we're going to be talking about callbacks. A lot of organizations use callbacks to get connected with callers if a call gets missed. And now we're going to be talking about how we can make them more effective.
So just to go over the process, and I'm sure many of you are very, very familiar with this, a lot of organizations might have something built into their regular hotline protocols where if a client calls and either the call is missed or it's during a certain time of day, et cetera, they might leave a message with either a live operator or a live receptionist in y'all's office or in a voicemail, and then the advocate is trying to return the call to the client. And a lot of the times organizations might use anonymizing the advocate's number so that if an abuser were to look at the survivor's phone and see that, you know, they wouldn't be able to see that the survivor had reached out for services. And if the abuser kind of went through the survivor's phone and dialed the caller ID from the callback, they also wouldn't kind of immediately learn that that the survivor had reached out for services if somebody answered and said, "Thank you for calling Domestic Violence Services." And basically, you know, that would lead to unsafety for the survivor. And so we've learned that agencies often have to choose between actually getting connected when making return calls and kind of maintaining those protocols and measures to encourage the client's safety. Because we've learned that anonymous caller ID can be really difficult to get through. We all get a lot of spam calls these days. And I encountered a phone update in the spring of 2020 that kind of automatically flipped a lot of people's phones to kind of block calls from anonymous caller IDs. And that would have to be flipped off for an agency using this kind of system, using anonymous caller IDs to actually be able to connect with the survivor. So then that leads to agencies not actually being able to offer service to the people who are reaching out for it. As well as just, you know, you want to make sure that anonymous caller ID is often, you know, there so that, or, you know, you want to make sure that the abuser can't track the call and can't, doesn't see that caller ID because, you know, it can have a number of repercussions. And one is, advocates trying to remember star 67 doesn't always work. And I've worked with an advocate who accidentally called back an inappropriate caller who had left a message and requested service without dialing star 67. And it resulted in the inappropriate caller actually reaching out to that advocate directly on her personal phone to try to to try to continue to be inappropriate. So what we've learned is that agencies are having to make this really difficult choice of, protecting client information, protecting client confidentiality, and then also like actually being able to connect with the survivors that that are reaching out for service.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the challenges around using an anonymous caller ID, and that the reason that an agency might hesitate on using this is because it may inhibit their ability to get connected with the client. But then what are the other options? What actually shows up on the client's phone as the caller ID if it's not an anonymous caller ID? Like are we creating unnecessary risk for are we creating problems by using a non-anonymous caller ID? So here are two options that you might consider. So you could have a separate caller ID entirely. so that if the abuser sees this caller ID on the on your client's phone and they call this number back, they end up hitting a voicemail only line that says something kind of generic, like "Thank you for calling Joe's Pizza. Please leave a message." Another option is you might say that, well, if somebody calls back the caller ID that shows up on the client's phone, then they'll get to some line that that'll say something like, "Thank you for calling Joe's Pizza. Please hold while we connect you." And then one of your advocates will live answer that call. Just make sure that if you choose the latter option, make sure that your system also tells your advocate, gives your advocate enough context and some kind of reminder so that they know that they're answering a call that was, to the Joe's Pizza line as opposed to your regular hotline. So takeaways here are really just that callbacks should work the way that your organization wants. The caller ID should be customizable. One big gotcha is around data tracking. So because the systems that advocates, volunteers use to make return calls tend to be very separate from the systems that vendors use to patch hotline calls through to advocates, the data of the callbacks tends to get lost. So if you decide you want to make callbacks, just make sure that those callbacks are also folded into the data, the call data provided by your vendor. That way, when it comes time to VOCA reports or other reports, you'll be reporting on all of the service that your agency has provided. The last thing I'll mention here is that a streamlined process can really prevent errors and improve caller privacy. The error is really just the situation that Carrie shared in the last slide around someone forgetting to use *67. But this system, like a streamlined process, can also help improve caller privacy. So if you have a lot of volunteers and every volunteer is able to see the phone number for every person who requested a callback, that's a lot of information that a lot of people are able to access. And really, your volunteers should be able to make return calls without needing to know the phone number of the person that requested the return call, and vice versa. The person who sees the return call doesn't need to know the volunteer's phone number. All they need to know is some sort of agency phone number, whatever you choose that to be. Okay, we'll expand a little bit more on inappropriate callers here.
So we've talked with a number of agencies that are having problems with inappropriate callers that, as you can see in the quote, are calling nonstop and pranking the hotline, to the point that one agency had to stop answering just to hope that the inappropriate callers will quit for a period of time. And another agency has shared that they're not great calls. They make the employees feel uncomfortable, and that it can contribute to burnout, especially if the same person is calling over and over in the middle of the night. Basically, inappropriate callers can be a form of sexual harassment that advocates face by just operating the helpline. And agencies often can't do very much to prevent advocates from just encountering that. It's just kind of a fact of the role, other than kind of offering that support on the other end after an advocate has encountered an inappropriate call. And ultimately that can lead to more drain on the agency's resources with having to offer that support to advocates who are dealing with an inappropriate call and the aftermath. And that can lead to, longer hold times for callers or missed calls if an advocate is having to take a step away because of an inappropriate call, as well as just many staff and advocates that we've, that are in this line of work are survivors themselves. And so it can be re-traumatizing and possibly lead to burnout if a advocate is, repeatedly encountering an inappropriate caller on the hotline. Yeah.
There's a couple of questions that often come up when we speak with agencies about inappropriate callers. One common question is, hey, what if we're not allowed to block inappropriate callers? Then there's probably nothing we can do. So that's not true. So instead of, if you're not allowed to block inappropriate callers, your vendor should instead be able to warn your advocates that they're about to take a call from a known inappropriate caller's phone number. That way, your advocate can be prepared and follow your agency's protocols. Another question that we often hear is, well, we don't want to block phone numbers because what if the inappropriate caller moves, somebody else gets that phone number, and that person needs our services? So if your policies allow it, your vendor should allow you to block callers with an expiration time. So for example, just block all calls from a given number for an hour or for the rest of the night. So in a lot of cases, this is sufficient to protect your advocates, to frustrate the inappropriate callers enough so that they stop calling your agency. And then finally, one last challenge that comes up a lot is, what if the person that's calling is, sophisticated? They're using some kind of caller ID spoofing technology to make inappropriate calls from a bunch of different numbers. Okay, so the key word here is a piece of regulation called stir shaken. So the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, now mandates that operators comply with stir shaken regulations, and they're designed to combat situations like this. Your vendor should be able to help you. Okay, next we're going to be talking about setting boundaries with extremely high volume callers. And Ashley is going to put up a poll for us, and this time I'll go over the answers. I just want to emphasize again, like we're not here to recommend that you do set boundaries with extremely high volume callers or that you don't. Like these are again decisions that really only make sense for your individual agencies, which are highly unique. We're just here to to let you know what's possible and just to really tell you about a lot of different cases where you should have options.
And just to say, I think we're defining extremely high volume callers a little bit differently from inappropriate callers on the whole, to where extremely high volume callers might be a caller who is reaching out multiple times, but isn't necessarily being inappropriate with the advocates. And we'll talk about that later. And I also just want to thank you all for sharing best practices in the chat. It feels really kind of rare and special to me to be able to talk about different ways that people are dealing with like the kind of nitty gritty, the logistics of like actually, how to answer the phone in a way that works for your communities and your agencies. So thank you all for sharing all of that. It's really cool to me.
Yeah, I also want to say thank you. I'm also I see the first couple of words show up in the chat, but I'm not really able to see the entire question. I know that some of you brought up really valuable comments and suggestions, so thank you for doing that. If you could post questions in the question section, that way Ashley can review them and we can answer as many questions as possible at the end. That would be really great.
We're a little over 50% on the poll, so I'm going to give about 5 more seconds for responses, if that's okay. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close that out and share the results.
Okay, so do you have a few extremely high volume callers? So actually about 2/3 of people say that they do. And number 2, does your organization want to limit access to their services, e.g. max number of calls per day, hour, month, etc.? So about 15% of people said yes, 86% of people said no. Thanks for sharing, guys. Okay, I'll go ahead to the next slide. And Carrie, this is you.
Yeah, so like I said, a lot of the times we talk with agencies that are dealing with people who are calling, as you can see in the quote, maybe 10 to 15 times per week or multiple times per week. And it's not necessarily an inappropriate call or an issue with people calling multiple times, but that they're calling so many times and they don't really need any service. And another agency has shared that advocates need to know that they're not just talking to the same few people, but that they're really supporting the community and that there can be a higher sense of burnout on the advocates end that agency has seen if they're talking to the same person over and over again. And so those kinds of uh, high volume calls can result in that burnout, that sense that from advocates and especially volunteers that they might not necessarily be making the impact that they really hoped that they would. And sometimes it can be really challenging for organizations to set those boundaries with those callers if they want to kind of say, hey, you can call us, and also like please make sure that you're reaching out to your other supports as well when you feel like you need to call us, just so that you're not having to call us 15 times just to get through your day, if that's what the organization wants to do, is set those boundaries. But then that might be challenging if there are multiple different people who are on the hotline at different times, kind of to make sure that everybody kind of knows and is reiterating those boundaries and can be aware of the number of, it's the nth number of time that that person has called. As well as just, as you can see, some organizations have identified this as a leading cause of burnout for them.
Okay, so about setting boundaries with extremely high volume callers. So if you want to set boundaries with extremely high volume callers, you should have the option to do this. So when you're doing that, look for a vendor that will carefully track the number of calls per hour, per day, per week for each caller, and follow your exact instructions on what to do if the number of connected calls for that specific caller exceeds your set limits. So there's a bunch of things that you could do. One concern you might have is, hey, well, we don't want to actually just turn the system off for them. We might want to do something else. So one option that you should have is the option of simply letting the advocate and or the client know that the caller's limit has been exceeded at the beginning of the call. That way you can change limits as necessary or handle the call differently if you guys choose to do so. Another option is you should also, if your organization wants to, just have the option of simply not letting any additional calls come through if a caller has exceeded their limit. The last thing we'll say about this is for chat and text. So your vendor should similarly allow you to place these limits on specific extremely high volume texters as well, if that's something that you want to do. Okay, we're going to talk about burnout, but from a different lens. And Carrie, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, so burnout is big and complicated and challenging, and this big, elephant that a lot of us have in the room when we're, getting together as advocates. And some agencies have identified that sometimes advocates won't know how much they're taking in until that they've hit the wall and burnt out. And a lot of the times, at least in my experience, advocates can kind of burn out and need to leave within a day. And that's not necessarily the advocate's, fault that they kind of had to leave so suddenly. Burnout can be really, really challenging to deal with. But not having that notice can be really difficult on the agency as well, because then other advocates are having to kind of stretch themselves to fill in those gaps. And the organization is, as the capacity is stretched, that might lead to longer hold times for callers, or kind of more challenges on the other advocates' end. As well as, like I said earlier, so many of the advocates and staff members in our community are survivors themselves, that it's kind of a net difficulty, a net negative on the community of survivors in our areas when advocates who are survivors burn out as well. Okay,
so sophisticated systems will let you get ahead of burnout in some specific ways. So in our experience, some burnout can be predicted. Not all, but some burnout. And the thing to look at is the total number of minutes that somebody's actually on the phone, on the hotline, speaking to somebody. That tends to be a much better indicator of burnout than the total number of shift hours per month. So I'll give you a story about one organization that we worked with. They had a very seasoned executive director, and they made a policy change, which seemed likely innocuous at the time. But it resulted in a huge shift in how their call volume was being distributed. They had a policy change on when repeat callers should call. And what ended up happening is that we had like advocates who were taking about 30 hours of shifts a month, and those advocates were like that one advocate each month was single-handedly taking on about 20% of all hotline calls. And that agency had plenty of advocates that were taking 200 and so shift hours per month. And there's at that point like potentially rampant speculation. Like, hey, how come this person who is taking 30 hours in a month is burning out, but like this other person is taking 230 hours and they're not burning out. And like it's hard to predict burnout, at least as far as we've seen, without having really good data. So your vendors, whoever it is, they should give you some kind of advanced notice system to predict burnout so that you can take corrective actions. Again, look for a vendor that will do this careful tracking for you, because it's a ton of work. And flag people who have taken more than X number of minutes of hotline calls in a given month. Okay, we're going to switch gears a little bit, and for the next few slides, we're going to start talking about chat and text. And we're going to start off with waiting rooms.
Yeah, I love chat and text. I love to see that about 20% of y'all have some form of chat and text as well. I was part of implementing it at a local agency, and I'm really excited by it, because I think that it allows us to serve so many more survivors in so many more situations. But I also know that it can be quite a hassle on the agency to try to organize, and so that's why we have some kind of common considerations and things in this. And one of them is that waiting rooms piece, because chat, a lot of the times the expectations that people might have is that as soon as they chat, they're connected with somebody, and sometimes agencies have one advocate on shift at a time, and that person might be on a call with another survivor, might kind of have to log into the system and all of that. And so agencies have shared that they have a concern that they could end up with frustrated chatters who kind of send a lot of messages while waiting for an advocate, and kind of get themselves further worked up, further escalated before the advocate can even get to their chat. And another agency that had a text and chat program said that once they're in the chat, they can talk with someone and have a lot of tools and to solve problems and to help prevent the survivor from overspilling. But obviously they can't use any of the tools that the advocate has if the advocate is not in the chat yet. And especially if the survivor is kind of continuing to send a ton of information. So basically, it can be really challenging to make sure that survivors are actually able to get the support that they need in a timely way to prevent them from kind of further escalating or kind of sharing, oversharing kind of from what they intended, or what you can help them with in one crisis chat interaction. And what we've learned is that waiting rooms can be a helpful feature for text and chat. So that, somebody kind of logs in, they're told, your number X in the waiting room, and then they can't send any messages until the advocate is actually there and able to help them. So that's one feature that we would encourage you to look for if you're considering chat and text, or if you have chat and text.
Okay, next we'll talk about safe exit.
So the vast majority of us are very familiar with safe exit. It's on almost all of our websites, to where if a survivor is on the website and clicks the safe exit button, they're redirected to kind of an innocuous tab. It kind of blanks out the tab and clears that from their history. A lot of the times, chat features should also include a safe exit. We recommend also making sure that the advocate can also click the safe exit button, or kind of enact a safe exit feature, just in case the survivor is, needs to be away from their computer, is unable to continue the chat, or, just walks away from their computer and forgets about it, that the advocate can hit, trigger the safe exit as well. so that it doesn't show up on the survivor's screen when they're not at the computer. They need it to not show up.
Thanks, Carrie. Okay, next we'll talk about pre-chat surveys.
Yeah, so a lot of agencies that we've talked with have pre-chat surveys as a part of their text and chat feature. Sometimes that can include providing some kind of basic contact information. But what we've learned is that it can be kind of confusing on the survivor's end, on the user end, because it might lead the survivor to kind of consider that they are already getting services, or that they're registering for something or registering for services. And it can also kind of lead to some challenges if a pre-chat survey is only in English and is required to begin a chat, but maybe the agency provides services in languages other than English, and and a client isn't really able to kind of navigate their way into actually being connected with an advocate as smoothly as possible. And then a lot of the times what I've encountered in pre-chat surveys is that once a survivor kind of fills out the pre-chat survey, what the chat feature does is kind of open a new tab or open a new pop-up, while many people have a pop-up blocker on their browser. And so I've encountered a situation where there was a pre-chat survey, and survivors were filling out the pre-chat survey, requesting service, and then their pop-up blocker was blocking them from actually getting any kind of services. And this was an issue that that a lot of survivors were running into, and just kind of not really able to connect with an advocate at that time. So we would encourage you to consider kind of how the pre-chat survey works, work with your vendor to consider the user end, as well as that pop-up blocker piece as well.
Okay, next we'll talk about delivery and read receipts.
So when I was training advocates on the chat and text line, I had to explain a lot that chatting and texting with crisis calls is very different from chatting and texting with your friends, because you might kind of chat or text for a little while and then kind of end the conversation and come back to it and kind of walk away from the situation, but kind of return to the same conversation. And understandably, that's not what a lot of agencies want out of crisis services, and especially out of domestic violence services. So sometimes we've talked with agencies that that might be running into an issue where a chatter will open several tabs and then kind of close a tab, but the advocate doesn't necessarily see that the chatter is no longer there. And so the advocate might be having to wait for a certain amount of time to make sure that the chatter is no longer there, or they might be just kind of sending messages into the void, and the chatter is gone from the computer, or kind of done with the chat. And so we've learned that delivery and read receipts can help to save a lot of time for the advocate, so that they're not wasting their time sending messages when there's nobody there, and they're actually available to serve any other survivors that are reaching out for service. So that when a advocate can see that delivery or read receipt, they can see that the person they're chatting with is still there, or if the messages are being sent, or if there might be a Wi-Fi issue and the survivor is not getting the messages at all on their end. So we recommend that you check for delivery and read receipts as well.
Okay, so the next topic is also on chat and text, and it's a really big one. So consider how you are notified of new conversations. This can have a tremendous impact on how seamless chat and text works at your organization. And Carrie will talk more about it.
Yeah, so this is another one that we hear from agencies that are considering chat or text, or kind of first implementing chat and text, that it can be a real challenge, especially for just the staffing energy of notifications. A lot of the times, because notifications might be only available if a advocate is logged in to the chatter text system or kind of sitting right in front of their computer and can receive kind of a computer-based notification. And one agency has shared with us that you have to make sure that you're always on the computer, and that the computer doesn't go to sleep, and that there's nothing like having to use the bathroom when you're on that kind of a shift, because you have to be on the computer. And another agency has ended up having an issue where they don't promote chat very much because that the notification system is so hard to manage. I think there are a number of challenges with that pop-up system, as well as I've encountered a situation where we had a notification system that was primarily based on that computer pop-up, but we were also able to kind of finagle our way into getting text notifications when a new chatter text came in, and we were pretty reliant on that. And then it just stopped working for a period of time and for kind of a number of times. And so we were having to kind of cover a 24/7 chat system for a whole week with only two of us, having to set alarms to wake up every hour to make sure our computer was awake and sleeping in front of the computer so that we could hear any notifications that came in. And that was just a huge drain on us, and obviously negatively impacted our ability to serve clients in that time. So at the end of the day, having a notification system that works for you and for your staff and for what you need is going to be pretty essential for notifying the advocates of the new chatter text.
Okay, so the takeaway here is really just that if you can't really respond if you aren't notified about new chats and texts in a timely manner. You'll likely have a lot of difficulties if your advocates have to be in front of a computer in order to receive notifications of new chats, especially if you guys are operating a 24-hour chat or text line. So if the notifications or of new chats or text end up going to spam, they're not super usable. And then finally, the last thing we'll say about this is do your homework. So organizations have expressed that their vendor system for notifying advocates about new chats previously worked, but is now buggy and unreliable. So please check your vendor's references. Okay, we're going to switch gears a little bit. We're going to start talking about making the shift schedule. And Ashley's going to put up a poll for us.
All right, give about 5 more seconds here for responses. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll and launch the results.
Okay, so does your organization spend around a half a full-time employee to make the shift schedule and coordinate with your vendor and advocates? So about 20% of people said yes, 25% of people said no, and then about half of people said, I don't know. Okay, so Carrie.
Yeah, many agencies spend a ton of time making the shift request process, and from a bunch of different agencies that we've talked with, a lot of the time it looks something like this, where an advocate can list out the shifts that they want, either by emailing the volunteer coordinator or hotline coordinator, or by filling out some kind of form or Google Sheets, and request their shift. And then the volunteer and hotline coordinator will kind of compile all of that information, put it together the absolute best that they can, and try to kind of get all of the information from all of the volunteers and advocates and staff members that they can, put it all in one big schedule, communicate it back to the advocates to confirm if there are any issues, and then communicate that to the answering service or however the calls are routed. And what we've learned is that that takes a absolute ton of time. And also that it can make last minute changes to the schedule a little bit more complicated when that kind of process has, is so in depth and requires so many steps, but also requires specifically the volunteer or hotline coordinator. And I worked with a volunteer who, wanted to see if they could miss the first 2 hours of their shift because they got a flat tire and had to deal with that. And I was kind of newer to this world and the backup at the time and had to try to find out how I could just try to make sure that the calls would skip her and come straight to me. But it was, but when I called the answering service to say, hey, can we please skip the volunteer for the first 2 hours of her shift? They said, no, we can't do that. I said, okay, can we change the whole shift entirely? And they said, the only person who can authorize changes is the technical assistance person, who at the time was our hotline coordinator. And it just kind of caused a whole bunch of extra steps and challenges to try to make sure that that last minute change was able to be made. So we've learned that the shift request can be very, very time intensive, as well as not very flexible when you need it to be.
Okay, so making the shift schedule should be easy. And so our recommendation about this is having a shift request approval process integrated with your call, chat, text routing system can save you a tremendous amount of time. So organizations often spend half a full-time employee making the shift schedule, doing all of this extra coordination and reporting. So prefer a vendor that does have this process built in. And you should look for a couple of key things in this process. One is that all advocates should see the most up-to-date shift schedule. There shouldn't be any funny business about some advocates seeing some kind of older version of the schedule and other advocates seeing a newer version. Any advocates should be able to request any open shift. And admin should additionally be able to reserve shifts so that nobody can request them. This has a couple of uses. One use is if you're rolling this program out, this can help you roll it out in a more controlled way. And the next is, you may have volunteers with your agency that have been with your agency for a long time and are always assigned specific shifts at specific times of the week. And you would probably want to reserve those shifts just to make sure that those shifts are given to those specific individuals. Next is the situation that Carrie shared. You shouldn't have to go through that. Your admin should be able to split shifts. So for example, split it the way Carrie suggested, or simply reassign shifts, which is the alternative solution that Carrie came up with. Your admin should just be able to do either one of those without calling your vendor and with a moment's notice. And then the last thing is language access. So I'll share a story that a lot of you guys are probably familiar with, but I just wanted to be top of mind. So one bilingual advocate shared with me, when she's on the phone speaking with, so she was a bilingual English and Spanish speaker, and when she's on the phone speaking with monolingual Spanish hotline callers, that those calls can be, 45 minutes or so, and they go into a fair amount of depth. But that when advocates that work with her who are monolingual English speakers speak to monolingual Spanish speakers through the hotlines, translator, the translator that their agency has selected, that those calls tend to be of a rather different nature. They tend to be more about getting resources. They're shorter calls and more about really just getting the caller pointed in a different direction. So if your agency wants to support, callers that speak, only one language that speak languages that aren't English, it can really help your agency if you're able to incorporate advocates that are also speakers of that language and also not English. This requires kind of a lot of things to work seamlessly together. It requires your hotline, your scheduling system, and a bunch of other stuff to kind of just work together in a bunch of different languages. One way to check to see if this is actually what's happening is like one quick, like you obviously can't check for everything, but one quick test is the shift reminders that are sent out. Sorry, the shift notifications that are sent out. So when your admin approves a shift, your vendor system will probably have some kind of notification process that'll let the requester know, hey, your shift has been approved or your shift request has been denied. Check those messages. Are they in English only, or do they work equally well for people who speak other languages? That's a decent test. The next is if your staff is unionized. So if you are unionized, your admin are likely going to need a little bit more context when they're approving shift requests, and that's something you should look for when you're selecting a system. Okay, we have another slide about reporting. So if reporting is built in, that will also save you a tremendous amount of time. The first thing I want to say about reports is that they should be reliable. You should be confident enough to use these reports to run payroll. If you're not confident enough to use these reports for payroll purposes, something's wrong. The reports aren't good enough. They're not reliable enough. They should also be flexible. You should be able to use these reports for all of your shift hour reporting needs. So, everything from reporting of in-kind donation of volunteer hours to other reports that your grantors might request. You should be able to run reports of shift hours by advocate. I just put that as a separate block. And then finally, this is potentially a big one, but it's more long-term. So your volunteers should be able to determine their hours without asking your staff. So a lot of agencies have some kind of a commitment requirement, and volunteers often want to know, am I within my hours commitment or am I not? Another reason that volunteers sometimes want to know about their shift hours, or even other staff who may not have this high level of access that you do, will want to know something like, how many hours have I contributed? I need them in a way that I can share them with a third party for like some sort of some purpose, like a grant program. And just not having your staff have to respond to these requests, but having some kind of self-service portal so that your volunteers can just get this information on their own, it can save you a tremendous amount of time in the long run. Okay, we're going to, so reporting for hotlines is super complicated, right? We have the hours, we have the reporting that's required for protecting against burnout, and then now we're going to be talking about one additional kind of reporting, call reporting. Carrie.
Yeah, so many agencies track, or first I want to ask, do y'all know how many crisis calls you got last month? Is that something that you can access easily? Oh, cool. I'm seeing some numbers in the chat. Wow, there's some impressive numbers. Yeah, so cool. One thing that we've learned is that for many agencies, the number of hotline calls and the amount of time spent on hotline calls can be tracked in the same system that they track services provided, and kind of more kind of in-depth caller information and service information about their clients. And the way that a lot of agencies do that is once a crisis call has been answered, the advocate needs to go and enter in the data to the client system, and so the client system, kind of that system, relies on your advocates reporting the data. And I have been on both sides of this coin, and I have been the bad advocate who does not enter my data at all because I was on the phone all day and didn't want to, or just wanted to go home after after being done. And then I've also had to be on the crisis coordinator side going, we need the data in order to be able to prove that we've done the number of crisis calls that we have actually done. There's a whole lot more to kind of client database things that we're not getting into in this section, but just the number of how many calls did your hotline get can be really, a very basic question that I've been asked from boards and community partners before. and had to explain, that's going to take me several hours to be able to kind of track down what was a hotline call, what was not a hotline call, and questions like, what was the increase in Spanish speaking callers from last month to this month, or what number of hospital accompaniment or in-person accompaniment requests have come in over the last 6 months. Should be very easy to answer, and should be something that that hopefully crisis coordinators are not freaking out when asked, like I have before. I'm not kind of claiming that any of y'all are freaking out, and it looks like a number of you, know those answers right away, which is really awesome.
Nice. Okay, so many organizations do actually have trouble determining the number of answered calls. Most of the organizations that we talk to use some kind of database to determine the number of hotline calls that get answered. But not all answered calls get entered into the database, which can result in you not getting the funding that you've earned. We've asked leaders at a number of agencies to estimate the number of calls that get entered into the database versus the number of calls that actually get answered. And estimates are usually around 50%. So think about it. Like you're submitting reports to your grantors, asking them for funding. They're giving you money, and then you're reporting back how much, like the service that you provided to the community. But you're only able to get credit for half of the work that you've done. So like from the grantor's side, they think that they're giving you enough money because they see only half of the work that you've actually done. So like think of how it might change your grant applications if you could report that you've done twice as much. Your vendor should let you export the call data that you need to just get this report into your favorite spreadsheet program, Google Sheets, Excel, and so forth. The report should tell you the number of calls that came in, the number of answered calls, break everything down by caller language, type of call, all sorts of stuff. And again, so these are not reports that are going to contain a ton of sensitive information. In fact, they should contain no personal identifying information whatsoever. And a red flag. So if it takes you more than a few minutes to determine the number of hotline calls that came in in a given time, that's a red flag. Okay, so we'll take questions.
Awesome. I just want to say thank you so much for all this fantastic information. I appreciate how much you're able to share in such a short amount of time. So we've got about 8 minutes. So we'll try to squeeze in as many questions as we can. I just wanted to also point out from the chat and reading everyone's responses, it's fantastic to see all the different systems that people have put together. I mean, I think you guys can agree. I mean, there's not just one way to approach this. So, a lot of people are passing phones back and forth. A lot of people do use the call answering services. And so with that, I wanted to actually ask you one quick question that I think will help kind of clear some stuff up that happened at the beginning. I was surprised to see how people were surprised that people use answering services. Could you guys just real quick share how people apply that? Because perhaps there's people who are using the phone and passing method that there are other options that they may not be aware of.
Yeah, I can answer that. And from what I understand, it might depend on different grant requirements or restrictions by state. Mm-hmm. So from what I understand, it's also kind of a thing that goes kind of state to state, or might be kind of the norm in one local area, but definitely not the norm in another local area. But it sounds like some agencies have a domestic violence shelter that kind of they take hotline calls in the shelter, and shelter staff kind of are the first people to answer the phone. Other agencies might pass a physical phone around, and the number to the hotline routes to that physical phone. Another kind of when we hear people using answering services, a lot of the time it might be just an after hours thing where possibly an agency might be using one system during business hours when more of the staff might be in the office, and then after hours when they're wanting calls to get routed to volunteers who might be taking multiple days of overnight shifts. They might kind of want to build in an answering service system to kind of build in some extra time for the volunteer to kind of wake up so that they're not rolling over out of bed and answering the phone in a very sleepy way when the survivor is in crisis. And then other agencies just use answering services kind of outright or third-party vendors to kind of manage either kind of during a COVID work from home moment that they kind of continued along with, or or just because different advocates might be in different places at different times, or when the answering service can help them to kind of triage calls as they're coming in, so that so that there's somebody answering right away. If that person is not an advocate, especially for agencies that might be having really high call volumes, and then might be, needing to not have all of the calls come to the same phone at the same time. From what I understand, it's kind of a move that a number of agencies kind of took a couple decades ago when answering services were kind of hitting it big as well.
So, so just to reiterate, an answering service isn't a third party that's actually talking to the survivor outside of just answering them and then saying, I'm going to connect you to the right person, right? It's not somebody that is not trained in domestic violence saying, well, I'm going to see what I can do for you. It's someone that's answering the phone and then connecting them with that trained person, right?
Ideally, yes.
Ideally, yes. Okay.
Definitely heard some recordings where things went very wrong, and they did actually try to offer services despite
not being
but that's
trained.
A whole other
okay. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that was clear, because I think there were some people that had not heard of answering services being used, so I wanted to make sure people understood how those are actually being applied, so they could see if that was a good fit for them. Another question we had, so I think a lot of the questions kind of stem into something that basically you've given a lot of solutions and a great checklist for people to when they're looking at looking at different softwares and programs. And I do want to preface that you guys obviously have a solution, and we can kind of maybe wrap up with you guys sharing a little bit more about the helplinesoftware.com. So I just wanted to kind of acknowledge those questions and share that, because they're coming from helplinesoftware.com, they're probably, you guys are probably going to suggest your solution and things like that you trust what you've created. So I just wanted to kind of call attention to that. But I guess outside of that, are there any companies that, I'm actually not going to go down that route. I think it's best just to keep with the questions really.
And if I can say, go ahead, sorry. Yeah, if I can say, like, I don't know right now what's going to work for your survivors and your communities. Like, y'all are the people who are actually working with your community and have the advocates that you have and have the system that you have. And and so I just don't know. I just can't tell you.
That's a great answer. One thing that someone had kind of mentioned was, is it normal for an advocate to take take the crisis phone home with them 24/7, a week at a time? Is that healthy? What have you found in your research is kind of a best practice for that?
We've definitely heard of agencies where people do this. I don't want to be the one saying whether or not it's healthy, because I wouldn't know. But I can definitely say that there are other agencies that do that as well. In the agencies that we've talked to, it's more common amongst agencies that have a lot smaller call volume, where they'll do this process of passing around a crisis phone, in 1 week increments, and that if that might work really well for your agency. It depends on your specific circumstances.
That definitely makes sense.
And like Suchandan said, I think it's also the trade-offs that you have between the number of calls that you get, the number of advocates that you have on a given time. And I'm sorry to kind of give a non-answer answer, but I think it does.
No, I think that really speaks to the nature of this conversation, is that it's so very specific in terms of your organization. Everything's going to be different. Your funding resources, your community. I mean, we obviously, from the numbers that were in the chat, based on how many calls did you get last month, we got a range from 0 to 2 to 2,000, so it's just, there's so many different ranges of that. So we're getting near the end of our time. So I want to kind of turn it over to you all, because I know that you're going to provide a link, or Rachel's going to provide a link to schedule some time with you all, because I think that's honestly might be the best option for many people to get their questions answered, to make sure that they can, correct any of those challenges. So I don't know if you want to move to your next slide and share any final thoughts as we wrap up.
Yeah, so how about I just go through this last slide. So we are helplinesoftware.com. And what I'll do is, so we work with agencies all over the country, and I'll just share 2 quotes that agencies have shared about us in some sort of public forum. So Bay Area Women Against Rape posted, Helpline Software created a customized call management system for Bayware's 24/7 crisis line and 24/7 accounting service. The donation of time and ongoing service has had a huge impact on Bayware's ability to effectively support survivors every day, and we couldn't be more thankful. YWCA Golden Gate Silicon Valley said on Twitter, Helpline Software has been an incredible thought partner. They offer creative solutions and really care about the mission of the agencies they serve. And I think that's where we'll leave it.
Awesome. Well, great. I really appreciate you all taking the time to share this expertise. We've gotten some really great feedback in the comments from people that found this information really helpful. And to everyone tuning in today, just a reminder that if you called in on your phone, so you're just listening, maybe on speakerphone on your phone right now and didn't log in on a computer, we don't have your email address. So just send us a quick note to info@domesticshelters.org. And to everyone listening today, then we will send over the slides, transcript, certificate of attendance, and links to any shared resources, including the link to schedule some time with Carrie and Suchandan as well. And just thank you to everyone who attended, and enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.